العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.
Alright, we all do the Allahumma kulli, right? Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Allahumma kulli waliyika al-Hujjat ibn al-Hasan. Salwatuka alayhi wa ala bai. Fi haji saat wa fi kulli sa. Waliyan wa hafizan wa qaidan wa nasiran. ودليلا وأينا حتى تسكنوا أرزك توا وتمتعوا فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. صلوات. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Sayid, Bismillah. Please welcome him with a loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
رحم الله من قرأ سورة الفاتحة. مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. والصلاة والسلام على إمام القبلتين ونبي الحرمين وأفضل الثقلين وجد الحسن والحسين الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد. وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الصادقين المظلومين والذين ذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك على صاحب الدعوة النبوية والسولة الحيدرية والاسمة الفاطمية والحلم الحسنية والشجاعة الحسينية والعبادة السجادية والمآثر الباقرية والآثار الجعفرية والعلوم الكاذمية والحجج الردوية والجود التقوية والنقاوة النقوية والحيبة العسكرية والغيبة الإلهية. اللهم عجل فرجا وسهل مخرجا. أما بعد، فقد قال الإمام علي بن الحسين زين العابدين عليه السلام: إن دين الله لا يصاب بالعقول الناقصة والآراء الباطلة والمقاييس الفاسدة، ولا يصاب إلا بالتسليم. فمن سلم لنا سلم، ومن اقتدى بنا هدي، ومن عمل بالقياس والرأي هلك، ومن وجد في نفسه شيئا مما نقوله أو نقضي به حرجا كفر بالذي أنزل السبع المثاني والقرآن العظيم وهو لا يعلم. صدق مولانا الإمام زين العابدين عليه السلام. For the love of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the love of Fatimatul Zahra in particular, a second salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. To give the Imam of our time our condolences during these days of mourning, a louder salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Amongst the most famous traditions of Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam is that tradition where the Imam says, Inna deen Allah la yusabu bil uqul al-nakisa wal ara al-batila wal maqayis al-fasida. That the Imam says that the religion of Allah cannot be understood by the deficient intellects, by incorrect opinions, and by invalid analogies. And then he explains what is the method to understand the religion of Allah. He says, وَلَا يُصَابُ إِلَّا بِالتَّسْلِيمِ. That if you want to understand God's religion, then the only way to do so is by submitting to it. فَمَنْ سَلَّمَ لَنَا سَلِمَ وَمَنْ اقْتَدَى بِنَا هُدِيَ. And the one who submits to us, Ahlul Bayt, will be saved, and the one who follows us will be guided. But as for those, وَمَنْ عَمَلَ بِالْقِيَاسِ وَالرَّأِي حَلَقَ. As for those individuals who act according to their own personal opinions and based on analogies that they've created, those individuals will be destroyed. And then the tradition concludes by saying anyone who has any sort of resentment towards what we say and decree, that person has disbelieved in the Quran unknowingly. You see, over here from this tradition, a discussion it begins. And that discussion is one which is very relevant within the modern world. It revolves around the question is that when it comes to understanding Islam, when it comes to understanding the religion, what role does the intellect play in understanding the deen, if it plays any role? Because on one side, when you examine this hadith of the Imam is saying that if you want to understand the religion of Allah, then submit to the religion of Allah. So this seems to imply that you submit to the teachings and this is the best route. But no, at the second level, if we re-examine this tradition, there are certain clues within this tradition that demonstrate that the Imam is not condemning every form of intellectual pursuit. Because the Imam, number one, says that deficient intellects can't understand the religion of God. The Imam does not say every intellect is not able to understand it. And number two, when you look at this narration, the Imam is speaking about juridic analogy, qiyas. So it goes to show that the Imam is speaking in a particular context. But regardless of this, you find this discussion in this narration is one of the most contested narrations when it comes to this topic. This is despite the fact that when you look at the school of Ahlul Bayt, and you look at our narrations and the hadith from the Prophet Muhammad and the Imams, you'll find that no other school within Islam has as many hadith about the role of the intellect, the importance of the intellect, the value of the intellect, the status of the intellect in the school of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. Because when you examine a work such as Al-Kafi, for example, the first book, the first chapter in Al-Kafi is Kitabul Aqli wal Jahl, the book of intellect and foolishness. And over there you'll find that there is tradition after tradition showing the importance of this intellect which God has given us. For example, one tradition will say that the intellect is primordial in its nature. That Rasulullah says, أَوَّلُ مَا خَلَقَ اللَّهُ الْأَقَلِ. That the first thing which Allah created was the intellect. Another tradition will say that the barometer based on which Allah punishes and gives reward is the intellect of a human being. There is a tradition from Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi, where the Imam, and this is actually the first narration in Al-Kafi, The Imam says, لما خلق الله العقل استنطقه ثم قال له أقبل فأقبل ثم قال له أدبر فأدبر ثم قال وعزتي وجلالي ما خلقت خلقا هو أحب إلي منك فلا أكملتك إلا في من أحب. The Imam says that when Allah created the intellect, He gave the intellect the ability to understand and speak. And at that moment, He said to the intellect, come forward, the intellect came forward. And then He said to the intellect, go backwards, the intellect went backwards. The moment the intellect did this, Allah said that I have not created a creation who is more beloved to me than you. And I do not perfect you except in those whom I love. And then it says, Ama iyaka amur wa iyaka anha wa iyaka oakib wa iyaka otib. Allah says, when I command and I prohibit, it is the intellect of the human being that I'm commanding. And it is the intellect of the human being that I'm prohibiting. And it is on the basis of this intellect that I give ajar and reward. And it is on the basis of this intellect that I punish. No, another tradition from Imam as-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. The Imam in that tradition says, Man kana aqilan kana lahu deen. Wa man kana lahu deen dakhal al-jannah. The one who uses his intellect has a deen and a religion. And the one who has a religion will enter paradise. All of these narrations, when we examine them, they show that our intellect has an immense position within the life of a human being. But at the same time, each and every one of us recognize that there are limits to the intellect as well. If I were to ask you that explain to me rationally the stages after death, you won't be able to do so. Rationally, using my intellect, I cannot deduce that when I die, I will be in that grave and two angels will come. Then after that, there will be this period of barzakh, an intermediary period. After that, I will be raised on the day of judgment, and there will be a sirat, and there will be all of this. Rationally, I can't understand that. For me to understand these details, I have to go to the hadith and the narrations. So what this goes to demonstrate is that yes, even though we have narrations that demonstrate the importance of the intellect and rationality, we recognize that rationality has limits. I mean, I'll give you another example. Is there anyone over here in this hall who will say that I disagree with this ayat of the Quran? You'll say that I can't understand what the verse is saying. But no Muslim is going to say that I have understood the word of Allah, but I reject what it is saying because my intellect is higher. No Muslim will do such a thing. So what this goes to show is that there are limits to the intellect. And what I want to do tonight is I want to explore that in what areas of the religion can I use rationality to understand them, and what areas of the religion are outside of the realm of rationality. Because this discussion is a discussion which has taken many different forms in Islamic history. For example, when we look at early Islamic history within the first 2 centuries, there was an entire heated debate about this role of the intellect. For example, one group, which were known as the Asharites, which are a theological group, they said that we cannot rationally understand good and evil. That when it comes to something being good and something being evil, we cannot use our intellect to understand it. Whatever Allah does is good, and whatever Allah does not do is evil. In other words, if Allah wanted to throw a pious individual into the fire of hell, who are we to question Allah at the end of the day? Allah has the power to do so, and if He does so, who are we to question Him? But you find that the school of Ahlul Bayt said no. It said that we can rationally understand that killing is bad. And we can understand that lying is something which is not good. Yes, the hadith, they give us the details, but there are many things that we can understand rationally. No, I'll give you another example. In the modern world, one of the most important events in the last 300 years, two of the most important events, number one was the Industrial Revolution, and number two was the Scientific Revolution. When these two events occurred in the past 300 years, you find that the entire structure of power in the world, it changed. That we began to see that Europe had a new life which was breathed into it after the Industrial Revolution. Many Muslims who were living in the Muslim lands, they felt a bit of an inferiority complex. That when you look at Europe, you look at these different areas, there is industrialization, there is machinery, there is a new economy, but when you look at our lands, none of this is occurring. So over here you find that one group went to the extreme of rationality. And what that extreme was, is they said that if we as Muslims are going to advance in today's world, we need to adopt the rationality of the Western world. And if we adopt their rationality, then everything in the Quran needs to be explained through modern science, everything in the Hadith needs to be explained through modern science. That if Rasulullah has a Hadith, they'll say, what does modern science say about this Hadith? If we say that the water of Zamzam is a mu'jiza, they'll say that what does modern science say about the water of Zamzam? You know, it went to such an extent that there was a thinker in Egypt who lived in the 1900s by the name of Dr. Taha Hussein. And Dr. Taha Hussein, when he interpreted the verses of the Quran, he tried to interpret everything in the light of modern science, which was highly problematic. For example, you've read the ayat of Surah Al-Fil, that it says, Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka bi ashabil fil. Alam yaj'al kaydahum fi tadlil. Wa arsala alayhim tayran ababil tarmihim bihijaratin min sijil. You know, this verse of the Quran, it describes that in the time period of the grandfather of Rasulullah, Abdul Muttalib, a group of individuals, they wanted to come and destroy the Kaaba. And that individual, he brought an army of elephants. And the Arabs had never seen elephants before. That imagine, you've never seen an elephant, and somebody pulls up to Jaffari Center riding on an elephant, it'll be something which is shocking. Now imagine a people, they bring a group of elephants to come and destroy the Kaaba. So at that moment, Allah, He shows a mu'jiza and a miracle. That all of these different birds, they come, in their beaks, within their talons, there are stones, they drop them on the army and the army is destroyed. You know, Dr. Taha Hussein, when he explained this, he said that this is a metaphor. And we need to understand everything in the Quran from modern science. And when it says birds, this means smallpox because birds, they carry smallpox. So you find on one end, this line of thinking was highly problematic. That when the Quran is speaking, the Quran itself is an authority. We do not need any outside source to verify the Quran for us. But then there was another extreme. That other extreme said that when you look at those individuals who were behind the scientific and industrial revolution, these are people who are atheists. And they say to us that your God is a God of the gaps. How many times have you heard this? That people, they say, in the olden days, we didn't understand things. When we didn't understand them, we would plug God into the equation. Now that we understand many things through modern science, we don't have a need for God. You know, one group of Muslims, when they heard such discussions, they said, no, intellect has no position within the religion. You know, it's very famous that in the Ottoman Empire in 1515, the Grand Mufti of that time, he passed a fatwa against the printing press. That there are no more books that are allowed to be published via the printing press. And in that regard, science has no role, intellect has no role. But when you examine the school of Ahlul Bayt, we find within the school of Ahlul Bayt, there is a balanced perspective. Because that perspective is based on the Quran. And if we are going to understand this discussion, that does rationality and aql play a role in understanding the deen, then we need to understand the question that does the Quran use rational and intellectual arguments? And over here I say yes, the Quran does use them. For example, when you look in the Quran, in Surah Al-Anbiya chapter 21 verse 22, Allah, He says that لو كان فيهما آلهة إلا الله لا فسدتا, that if in the heavens and the earth there was a God besides Allah, then there would be corruption, there will be fasad. In other words, the Quran is saying, O human being, reflect upon this universe. When you see everything is in harmony, that everything is interconnected, one process leads to another process, this should be a sign that there is one God who created this universe in harmony. Over here, the Quran gives the rational argument that if there was more than one God, each of them would have their system. And sometimes their systems would collide with each other, and that would lead to there being corruption and disharmony. So you find this is one argument. Then the Quran uses another rational argument. It says in another verse, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ, that, O human being, do you not ponder over this Quran? وَلَوْ كَانَ مِنْ عِنْدِ غَيْرِ اللَّهِ لَوَجَدُوا فِيهِ اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا, that if this Quran was from anyone other than Allah, you would find contradictions within this Quran. In other words, the Quran, using rationale, is posing an argument to mankind. It is saying, O mankind, if you want to prove that this book of mine is not a divine book, that this book does not come from me, Allah, then all you have to do is find one contradiction in this Quran. But if you are not able to find one contradiction within it, then your aql and your intellect should conclude that this is the book of Allah. So you find this is another intellectual argument the Quran uses. A third example is the Quran in Surah Al-Waqi'ah. It says that فَلَوْلَا إِذَا بَلَغَتِ الْحُلْقُومِ وَأَنْتُمْ حِينَئِذٍ تَنْظُرُونَ وَنَحْنُ أَقْرَبُ إِلَيْهِ مِنْكُمْ وَلَكِنْ لَا تُبْصِرُونَ. The Quran says that when you look at a dying individual, and the moment it comes when their soul has reached their throat, and you are near that individual, recognize that we are closer to him than you. But then after that, it says something which is very interesting. It says, فَلَوْلَا إِن كُنْتُمْ غَيْرَ مَدِينِينَ تَرْجِعُونَهَا إِن كُنْتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. The Quran gives one rational argument until the Day of Judgment. It says that if you are not constricted, in other words, if you were able to do whatever you want and there's no constriction, then the moment that this individual dies, bring his soul back into his body. You know, when you look at modern science is amazing. That those diseases just 40, 50 years ago, people would die in their early 30s out of polio or something which is considered very minuscule in today's world. Today, with a simple vaccine, we've solved many diseases. In half a century, we were able to do that. But is there any doctor today who claims that the moment a person has died, they can bring him back to life? The Quran is giving a simple test. It is saying, O mankind, if you are not constrained, then bring your dead back to life. And in this regard, the Quran is using a rational argument. You see, people ask the question that what role does intellect play? If I said to you that prove to me the existence of God, how would you do it? Would you say that Rasulullah said God exists? Would you say that the Quran says God exists? No, you can't say that. Why? Because it is a circle. The fact that Rasulullah has authority is because he is the Prophet of God. And the fact that the Quran has authority is because it is the book of God. So in that sense, you find that the first means that we use to establish the existence of God is we use rational arguments. And we can use Rasulullah and the Quran as a rational argument, not as a proof in and of itself. And what I mean by this is, how do you use Rasulullah as a rational argument? If you look at the seerah of the Prophet, Rasulullah was not known to have ever lied within his lifetime. I can look at the life of Rasulullah and I can say, look, Rasulullah never lied. If this individual never lied and he says that Allah exists, then that must mean that he is not lying about this and Allah exists. Didn't Rasulullah one day stand upon the mountain known as Mount Abu Qubais? And as he was standing on the mountain, he said to the disbelievers of Makkah that if I were to tell you that there is an army on the other side of the mountain, would you believe me? All of them said, "O Rasulullah, we know you as Sadiq and truthful. And we know you as Ameen and trustworthy. If you tell us there is a army on the other side, then there is an army on the other side." Then after that, Rasulullah, he says, now I am telling you that there is no God except for Allah. So you find Rasulullah over here is presenting a rational argument. So what this demonstrates is when it comes to aqaid and belief, rationality plays an important role in establishing our aqaid. That's why when you look at Prophet Ibrahim, the Quran time and time again shows that the Prophet Ibrahim used rational arguments to prove the existence of Allah. You know, one day, the people of the town of Ibrahim, they leave that town. So what does Ibrahim do? The Prophet Ibrahim, he goes to the idol temple. And when he goes to the idol temple, he destroys all of the idols. But one of the larger idols, he does not destroy it, and he places that axe in front of that larger idol. Now imagine the people of the town, they come back. They go to the idol temple, they notice all of their idols are destroyed. They're in shock at that moment. So at that moment, naturally, they know Ibrahim would speak against the idols. So they go to the Prophet Ibrahim, and they say, أَفَعَلْتَ هَذَا بِآلِهَتِنَا يَا Ibrahim? That, oh Ibrahim, are you the one who did this to our gods? You know what Ibrahim, he replies, قَالَ بَلْ فَعَلَهُ كَبِيرُهُمْ هَذَا إِنْ كَانُوا يَنْتِقُونَ. Ibrahim says, no, I did not do it. But rather, it was the largest of the idols who destroyed the rest of them. فَاسْأَلُوهُمْ إِنْ كَانُوا يَنْتِقُونَ. Go and ask the idols who did it. The Quran at that moment, it uses a very interesting expression. It says, فَرَجَعُوا إِلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ. All of them, they returned to themselves. They returned to their intellect. That they had a moment that they realized that if these idols cannot speak, how foolish are we that we have taken them as our gods? And Ibrahim alayhi salam explained this through a rational means. This is one example. Another example in the life of Ibrahim, it stated that one day Ibrahim is in the wilderness. He's in nature. So the Quran, it says that فَلَمَّا جَنَّ عَلَيْهِ اللَّيْلُ رَأَى كَوْكَبًا. That when nighttime it came, Ibrahim saw a star within the sky. The moment he saw that star, قَالَ هَذَا رَبِّي, this is my Lord. In other words, those people who were there, they would worship the heavenly bodies. They would worship the stars, the moons, the sun. So at that moment, Ibrahim says, this is my Lord. فَلَمَّا أَفَلَ قَالَ لَا أُحِبُّ الْآفِلِينَ. At that moment, as he's watching the star, it disappears, it goes away. Ibrahim says, I don't like that which sets. In other words, that which comes and disappears cannot be a Lord and a God, because God should always be present. After that, the next ayat it says, فَلَمَّا رَأَى الْقَمَرَ بَازِغًا. Ibrahim, he sees the moon come up. When he sees the moon come up, Ibrahim says, قَالَ هَذَا رَبِّي, this is my Lord. فَلَمَّا أَفَلَ. Then after that, the moon, it disappears again. Ibrahim, he says that in لو لم يهدني ربي لأكونن من القوم الظالمين, that if my Lord does not guide me, then I will be amongst those who are the wrongdoers. In other words, if there is a God, that God must always be present. Because if he is not present, then I will go off the right path. And this moon, once again, it comes and it disappears. After that, the Quran says, the final thing that Ibrahim sees, فَلَمَّا رَأَى الشَّمْسَ بَازِغَةً. The final thing Ibrahim sees is the sun. The moment the sun comes up, Ibrahim says, قَالَ هَذَا رَبِّي هَذَا أَكْبَرُ. He says that this is the biggest of them. It is bigger than the moon. It is bigger than the star. This must be my Lord. فَلَمَّا أَفَلَتْ قَالَ يَا قَوْمِ إِنِّي بَرِيٌّ مِمَّا تُشْرِكُونَ. The moment the sun disappears, Ibrahim says that I am free from those who you ascribe to Allah. So everything within these ayat, Ibrahim is using a rational argument. If the Quran is condemning using your intellect, using your mind, then the prophets of God would not have used rationality. The final example from the life of Ibrahim, where Ibrahim uses the intellect, is that the Quran, it says, أَلَمْ تَرَ إِلَى الَّذِي حَاجَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ فِي رَبِّهِ أَنْ آتَاهُ اللَّهُ الْمُلْكَ. That do you not see that individual who argued with Ibrahim about the Lord of Ibrahim on the basis that God gave him a kingdom? In other words, Nimrud, after he was given power, Nimrud, he became arrogant. And he said that I myself am God. So Ibrahim says to Nimrud, okay, you say that you are God. إِذْ قَالَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ رَبِّيَ الَّذِي يُحْيِي وَيُمِيتُ. He says Allah is the one who gives life and he causes people to die. If you say that you are God, then give life and cause people to die. You know what Nimrud says? He says, قَالَ أَنَا أُحْيِي وَأُمِيتُ. I give life and I give death. Ibrahim says, what do you mean? You give life, you give death. There were two people in front of Nimrud. Nimrud says, I order for one of them to be executed, and I order for the other to go free. In this manner, I am giving life to one, I am giving death to one. Ibrahim at that moment says, قال إبراهيم فإن الله يأتي بالشمس من المشرق فأتي بها من المغرب. Okay, if you think that you give life and death, my Lord is the one who brings the sun out from the east. If you are God, then bring it out from the west. So in that manner, you find that when it comes to aqaid, rationality plays a role. But as I mentioned before, there are certain things, even in aqaid, that we can't understand rationally. We cannot understand the stages of the Day of Judgment rationally. We cannot understand some of the nature of God rationally. If Ahlul Bayt didn't explain that to us, then we would not be able to understand this. This is the first level. The second question, after this first question, that did the Quran use rationality? And the answer is yes. The second question is that did Rasulullah and the Imams of Ahlul Bayt answer people using rationality and the intellect? And over here, the answer is yes. You know, one famous example of this is on the day of Siffin. On the day of Siffin, one of the people who was killed on the side of Imam Ali alayhi salam was Ammar ibn Yasir. Ammar ibn Yasir is one of the famous companions of Rasulullah. And Rasulullah has a hadith about Ammar that he says, Wayha Ammarin, that my sorrow be for Ammar. Taqtuluhul fi'atul baghiya, a rebellious and oppressive group will kill Ammar ibn Yasir. Now Ammar is killed on the side of Imam Ali alayhi salam. The other side, they have a moment of reflection that we killed Ammar ibn Yasir. Rasulullah said Ammar will be killed by oppressors. What does that make us? So at that moment, they came up with an excuse. And you know what their excuse was? Their excuse was that Ali ibn Abi Talib killed Ammar because he brought him to fight. You know, the moment Imam Ali hears this, Imam Ali doesn't say that I am the proof of God, I am the Imam, follow me blindly. No, the Imam gives a rational argument. He says that if you say that I am the killer of Ammar, because Ammar came because of me to fight with me, then Rasulullah is the killer of Hamza. Because on the day of Uhud, Hamza came to fight with Rasulullah and he was killed on the side of Rasulullah. So you see, Amir al-Mu'mineen gave a rational argument. No, there's another example. This example, it says that one day there were two individuals sitting in front of the Kaaba. One of those individuals, he was a famous man by the name of Ibn Abil Awja. Ibn Abil Awja, he was a Muslim and then he lost his faith. He became an atheist. So he's looking at the people do Hajj, that they're going around the Kaaba, that everyone has their ihram on. And when he's looking at them, he says to his companion that all of these people are like animals. They follow blindly, they don't reflect, they don't think. But there is one exception to this. You see that old man over there? That man is not like an animal. And he points to Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. His companion, using my own words, he says to him that, listen, you made a very strong statement. You said that all of them are like animals, but then you make an exception. You point towards that man, Ja'far as-Sadiq, and you say he is not like them. Why do you say that about him? He replies by saying, because I've seen things in him that I have not seen in anyone else. So his companion, he says, I have to go inspect for myself. When he goes to the Imam, he speaks to the Imam, then he returns to Ibn Abil Awja, and he says, you were right. Ibn Abil Awja says, what happened? He says that I went to Ja'far as-Sadiq. And when I went to Ja'far as-Sadiq, I saw that he was not speaking to me. But when he finally spoke to me, he said to me, look at all of these people. If all of these people are right, in other words, they're right about the existence of God and they are right, then you as an atheist are in trouble. But if you are right, but you are wrong in reality, then at that point, all of you are the same. In other words, the Imam uses what in modern psychology, modern philosophy, we call Pascal's wager. What Pascal's wager states is that when it comes to discussing with atheists, if an atheist is wrong and there is no afterlife, everyone is on the same level. That there is no punishment for being wrong. But if that atheist is wrong and religion is right, then the believers of religion will be rewarded and that atheist will be punished. And you find over here, this is a very rational argument. And at the second level, it demonstrates that when we follow the religion, it is because within this world, it gives us the best chance at success. And it gives us a life of organization. And in that reality, the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, they demonstrated this. So this is a second example. But over here, the question it comes up. That if we say that the intellect is a faculty through which we understand, and intellect plays a role within the life of a human being, Does this mean that we can call anyone an intellectual? That can we call the enemies of Ahlul Bayt people who would use their aql? You know, when you look at the traditions of Ahlul Bayt, you find that the word intellect and aql has been used in many different ways. One of the ways in which the word aql is used is a faculty that understands different things. That using your mind, you are able to understand many different things. But at the second level, the narrations also demonstrate that the aql and the intellect is a gift from God. And in that regard, it is that measure through which you reach Allah. You know, one day, one individual asked Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. He says to the Imam that what is aql, ma al-aql? You know what the Imam says? He says, ma ubida bihir rahman wa ma tuksiba bihil jinan. That the intellect is that through which Allah is worshipped. And the intellect is that through which Jannat and paradise is acquired. Now over here, the question that the narrator asks is, فَالَّذِي كَانَ فِي مُعَاوِيَةَ. What about Muawiyah? From the worldly's perspective, Muawiyah would deceive others. To deceive a person who is intelligent means that you yourself must be intelligent. But O Imam, at the second level, you describe the intellect as a means to reach Allah. The Imam replies by saying, Tilka nakra, tilka shaytana, wa hiya shabihatun bil aqal wa laysat bil aqal. He says that what Muawiyah had wasn't intellect. In other words, if you are not going to use this gift from God properly, do not call it aql and intellect. That thing in its reality is satanic. It represents the aql, but in reality, it is not the aql. And that's why when we come to the final level of this discussion, the final level of this discussion is that the question is that does the intellect play a role in understanding Islamic law? Over here, this question is something which is vitally important. There are many people that say when you look at Islam, Islam is outdated when it comes to many different laws. For example, the inheritance of women is something which is out of date. The role of hijab is out of date. There are many different other areas which are out of date. The question is that does the aql play a role in Islamic law? You know, in Islamic law, we say there are 4 ways in which we derive law. Number 1, from the Quran. Number 2, from the Hadith. Number 3, from ijma and consensus, which has the view of the Imam. And number 4, from the intellect. But intellect, we find in Islamic law, has a limited role. For example, when we do wudu and we wipe our foot, we are wiping the top of our foot. Why? Because the Imam and the Quran says to wipe the top of your foot. Someone over here can turn around and say that, oh Allah, the bottom of my foot is dirtier because I am walking on the bottom, not the top of my foot. But over here, what the deen is teaching you is that even though intellect has a limited role in Islamic law, when it comes to the Shariat, we submit to the Quran and we submit to the Hadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. And that's why when we look at the ashab of Imam al-Hussein, the greatest quality of Imam al-Hussein's companions was not that they were smart individuals, they were intellectuals. They were the reciters of the Quran. They were people who were intelligent. But their greatest quality, which is mentioned in the ziyarat, is that they submitted to Imam al-Hussein. That doesn't the ziyarah say, Assalamu alaikum wa alal arwah allati hallat bifinaik? That what does this line, which many of you recite, mean? This line, it says, Salam be upon you, O companions of Hussein. For you are those souls that annihilated yourself at the doorstep of Aba Abdullah. That each of these companions, to their capacity, they submitted to the Imam of their time. You know, there was one companion by the name of Sayid al-Hanafi. Sayid was an individual who was very elderly, that perhaps he was above the age of 90. That what is a person that elderly going to do upon the battlefield? But you know what Sayid he does? The moment Imam al-Hussein begins his prayer, Sayid he stands in front of Abu Abdullah. And as he stands in front of Imam al-Hussein, you find arrow after arrow is going into the body of Sayid. And the moment Imam al-Hussein says, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, you find Sayid, he falls to the ground and he says, Assalamu alayka ya Abu Abdullah. You see, these are the companions of Imam al-Hussein, that each of them, they submitted to the Imam. But I say, oh companions of the Imam, despite your sacrifice, what day came upon the family of Rasulullah that with their arms tied, they're taken from marketplace to marketplace? And without a doubt, one of the most difficult moments that when they said to Imam Zainul Abidin that, oh Sayyid al-Sajjad, what was that most difficult moment in your journey? The Imam, he says, Asham, Asham, Asham. I say, oh Imam Zainul Abidin, what happened in Sham? You know, there's one narration. The Imam in Biharul Anwar, he says that when we were taken to Damascus, all of the women, they were upon mules with no saddles. That when we were there, in front of us was the heads of the Shohada. From all sides we were surrounded, and they would point their arrows towards us anytime we would cry. But then that moment it comes that they reach the doorstep of Sham. When they reach the entrance to the city, it is stated at that moment that Shimar, he hangs the head of Imam al-Hussein on the door of Sham. That for several hours Ahlul Bayt would stand at the door of Sham. And it stated at that moment, the sister of Imam al-Hussein, Kulthum, she sees the head of her brother hanging. The moment she sees the head of Abu Abdullah, she says, Ya Rasulallah, Hada Rasu Habibak al-Hussein Maslubun, Ya Rasulallah. She says, oh my grandfather, this is the head of your Hussein which is hanging here. Then after that, that moment it comes that they enter the bazaar and the marketplace of Sham. You know, Imam al-Baqir says that when we were in the marketplace of Sham, that people would say that the rebels have come. That people, they would throw rocks at us. And then from the top of their houses, as we would walk, they would pour boiling water on us, Ahlul Bayt. One point it comes that boiling water was poured on Imam Zainul Abidin, and the turban of Imam Zainul Abidin, it catches on fire at that moment. But no, another narration it says that there was a companion of Rasulullah. His name was Sal ibn Sa'd al-Sa'idi. When he sees Imam Zainul Abidin, he says, oh man, I was a companion of your grandfather Rasulullah. Is there anything I can do for you? You know what the Imam says? The Imam says, oh man, if you can do anything, then go and bring me a piece of cloth. The man says, I didn't understand that. Why does he want a piece of cloth? He says, the moment I brought that cloth, the Imam places that cloth between his neck and the chain upon his neck. And he says, O Sal, from Karbala to Sham, the metal has been burning my neck. Then after that moment it comes. They enter the court of Sham. That in front of the women is the heads of the Shohada. That Yazid, he takes a stick. He begins to hit the teeth of Abu Abdullah. You know, at that moment, in the court of Sham, there was a wife of Yazid by the name of Hind. Hind says to Sayyida Zainab, min ayyi biladin antum? Sayyida Zainab says, Nahnu min bilad al-Madina. The moment Sayyida Zainab says Madina, Hind, she comes, she sits in front of Sayyida Zainab. She says that I used to be a servant in a house in Medina. Sayyida Zainab says, which house were you a servant in? She says that I used to serve in the house of Ali and Fatima. The moment Sayyida Zainab, she hears this, she says, oh lady, do you know anyone within that house? She says, I know Hussein, I know Zainab. The moment she says this, Sayyida Zainab says, oh Hind, that is the head of Hussein. And oh Hind, I am Zainab, oh Hind. That what did Karbala do to Sayyida Zainab? ألا لعنة الله للقوم الظالمين سيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون ماتم حسين يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين
لبيك يا حسين لبيك يا حسين سلام قرب و بلا یا حسین یا مولا سلام ہے شہیدان کربلا وفا ہر ایک ذرے سے ماتم کی آ رہی ہے صدا أنا زوار حسين ابن علي 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 چلا ہوں کرب و بلا ہے زباں پہ بسم اللہ ہے دل میں کلمہ حق لا الہ الا اللہ سفر قبول کرے یا حسین سار اللہ سفر قبول کرے یا حسین سار اللہ ہم لوگ عزادار حسین ارو اللہ ہم لوگ وفادار حسین ارو اللہ ہم لوگ طرفدار حسین ارو اللہ اے آقا میرے اے مولا میرے نوکر ہے صدا زوار تیرے انا زوار حسین ابن علی انا زوار حسین ابن علی انا زوار حسین ابن علی ارباب من الذکر تو مجنونم مجنونم سرشکستنس عشق تو قانونم قانونم دیوان طرز ہمیشہ میخونم دیوان طرز